Have young voters soured so much on President Joe Biden that they're now supporting Donald Trump? For the New York Times, for the first time, Mr. Trump leads President Biden among the youngest voters in a Time CNN national survey, 49% to 43%. It's enough to give him a narrow 46 to 44 lead among registered voters overall. Young voters say Biden hasn't delivered on his campaign promises and isn't making their lives better. Let's watch some of the disaffected speak with NBC.
Give me the emotion that you have looking at your choice this election.
Not enthused. I'd say overall I feel very pragmatic and strategic about it.
All of these issues that are popular with Democrats, he has not only not addressed, but often gone the entire opposite way on. I mean, I can look at like almost every issue in my head that's important to me, and I see a failure on Biden's part.
Biden's age is also playing into voters' concerns. Per Axios, polls indicate that more than 70% of voters have concerns about Biden serving a second term because of his age. However, the president is in apparent denial. Aides tell Axios. The outlet reports that the first lady and staffers to the president are frustrated by Biden's blanket refusal to acknowledge his own physical limitations. Now, here to discuss Biden's young voter woes is host of Sabby Sab's podcast, Sabrina Salvati. Welcome back, Sabrina.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, our pleasure. So every day we talk about the more bad poll results for Biden, more bad news for Biden. Now specifically down. First, it was specifically down in the swing states. Now it's specifically down with young people, down so far that it actually looks right now like Donald Trump could somehow win the youngest age demographic. What is going on here?
So I actually worked with this population for quite some time at the universities. And I think what people have to understand is that by the time they would reach me when they were 18 years old, this particular population was already incredibly resourceful. They are less likely to buy into the narrative from mainstream media. They're more likely to seek out other outlets and opinions. They had resources at their fingertips that I think my generation did not have growing up. There was no independent media show to watch on YouTube when I was growing up because YouTube didn't exist. So there are a lot more platforms that they have access to as well. And I think that they're just less likely to buy into the two-party system as well, too. But I think when they're comparing Joe Biden to Donald Trump, they're thinking about two things. They're thinking about the economy and they're thinking about foreign policy decisions. So when it comes to the economy, I think the reason why some of these voters are walking away from Joe Biden is that even though Joe Biden has claimed that he's created all of these jobs, a lot of these graduates, particularly the undergraduate college students, they're graduating and the job offers that they're receiving when I spoke to them, a lot of these are gig positions that don't have full-time benefits. So when Joe Biden says in a press conference that he's created all these jobs, but he doesn't explain to you what those jobs are and if they actually offer benefits, that's a problem in that generation in particular that's out in the job market. They can see that Joe Biden isn't being honest, and then they can make that comparison to Trump's economy when he was president. How were they doing in reference to inflation? How were they doing in reference to wages? So they can make the comparison there. Then there's the foreign policy decisions that Joe Biden has made. While I would not call Donald Trump anti-war, I will say that he didn't start any new wars. We now have 2 international conflicts under Joe Biden, possibly a third, considering the U.S. government is willing to go to war with Yemen now. So these are really big issues. And I think this is the first time that I've seen, at least in my adult life, where people are actually unwilling to vote for a presidential candidate because of their foreign policy decisions, particularly the younger voters. But I think this population in particular, what they have said to me is that they feel like their voices are not heard, and they're seriously worried about their future, particularly their economic future. They're not even trying to think about purchasing a home or starting a family. They're trying to use the money that they do have on experiences because they've told me there's no way they're going to be able to buy a house or start a family in the first place.
The binary nature of our political system seems to be forcing even this conversation into a zero-sum game where there's a kind of built-in presumption as we're talking that votes that are being lost from Biden or lost by Biden are going to Donald Trump when polls on all of the issue areas that you just weighed in on there seem to suggest that younger voters are leaving Biden because they want a more progressive, if you can even call it that. Some of these are just such mainstream desires, like having a living wage, having some guarantee of health care despite having the poorer employment prospects that you just described, et cetera, et cetera. Those are what's driving voters. So how does bringing in the interest in third-party candidacies, whether it's Cornel West, Jill Stein, RFK Jr., Cenk Uygur, whoever it is, factor into what's going on here?
Yeah, so some of the young voters I've spoken to told me that they're more willing to vote for like a Jill Stein or a Cornel West, but most of them that I've heard from said they're most likely to sit it out. Some have decided to move over towards Donald Trump, particularly some of them who are African-American voters are saying that they're going to move over towards Donald Trump. I think that when you have candidates like Jill Stein, Cornel West, and also RFK Jr. as well, I think that they're speaking to certain issues that really appeal to younger people. So we all know Jill Stein and Cornel West, they tend to have the same position when it comes to Israel and Gaza. So a lot of the younger voters that are out there protesting in the streets, they're looking for a candidate that has the same position on that issue as they do. Now, this is different compared to 2020. We didn't have this war with Israel and Gaza. There was still the occupation and oppression, but we didn't have this war. So at that point in time, Joe Biden didn't have to really concern himself with that. We also didn't have this war with Ukraine. So it's a very different dynamic now. And I think more younger voters, if they do come out to vote, I think more of them will go towards a Jill Stein or a Cornel West. I just saw a poll recently that showed that Jill Stein is polling 7% among younger voters, which is pretty significant for a third-party candidate. I think RFK Jr. was polling at 15%, but I think that's because some of the younger voters are still not aware of his position when it comes to this issue with Israel and Gaza. I think once they hear more from him about this, I think they're more likely to be turned away from him on that position. But the big thing that I keep hearing from people is the economy. They're still dealing with inflation. They're still dealing with finding a job, a permanent job that is going to give them benefits, and they're unsure about their future, and they feel like they just don't see a path forward. You compare that to Donald Trump's presidency in 2020, and they didn't have some of those same concerns. And I think that's the big thing, and that's raising a lot of flags for people.
What could Joe Biden do between now and Election Day to bring people back into the fold? Does he have to hope, the Gaza issue comes to some end of its own accord, or the economy magically gets better and people respond to that or credit Biden's policies with achieving that?
I think two things need to happen. Number one, he's going to have to call for a permanent ceasefire and stop funding Israel with arms. That's a big one that will resonate with the younger voters. The other issue is Joe Biden has to actually build a base, which he never did. We all have to go back to the 2020 election. You got to remember, some of these younger voters supported Bernie Sanders. Bernie actually had the youth vote. When Bernie dropped out and he told those younger voters to support Joe Biden, it's not like they were passionate about voting for Joe Biden. They were just doing what Bernie told them to do so that we wouldn't get Donald Trump. So there was that fear mongering of Donald Trump. However, the problem is, and I warned about this, Joe Biden never actually built a solid base. So what you had were people who were voting against Donald Trump. You had younger voters who voted for Biden because Bernie told them to, so that you don't get Donald Trump. And you had the loyal Democrat voters that are going to vote for the Democrat candidate, regardless of who they are anyway, because they're going to support the party. Now we enter Joe Biden's possible reelection, and he's starting to see he never built a solid base. So I would not be surprised if Joe Biden loses in 2024. And I'm pretty sure they're going to blame young voters. They're going to blame African-American men. They're also going to blame the third-party candidates. But the blame lies on Joe Biden for not fulfilling his campaign promises.
Sabrina Salvati, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.